Ukraine's foreign minister wants the world to know that the U.S. is still a trustworthy partner, he tweeted yesterday, quote, "During our call today, Secretary Blinken reaffirmed the ironclad U.S. support and vehemently rejected any attempts to cast doubt on Ukraine's capacity to win on the battlefield."
But recent reporting showing apparent gains made by the Russian military paints a darker picture for the state of Ukraine's defense. According to experts, the Kremlin already launched its much-anticipated spring offensive, though Ukraine continues to hold control over key strongholds like Odessa, Kherson, and Kharkiv. It's barely holding on to Bakhmut, the next city Russia appears to have its focus on. Here to weigh in on the state of the Russia-Ukraine war is George Bebee, Director of Grand Strategy at the Quincy Institute. Welcome back, George.
Thank you.
You know, we get a lot of, I think, sometimes overly granular information about the state of the war. Sometimes it seems to be too big a picture and too kind of philosophical about what will bring it to the end without really helping us to understand what the state of play on the ground is. You know, what should we infer about possible resolutions to the war given the status of the battle right now?
Well, you know, it's very tempting to try to track progress in the war on maps, to look at the big arrow movements of various groups of forces on both sides and ask who's winning, who's gaining the most territory, who looks poised to break through the other side's defenses. But there's another aspect to this war that is very important, particularly in a war of attrition, and that is each side's capacity to continue waging this conflict, to bring troops to the front, to supply the various delivery vehicles with ammunition, with missiles, with rockets. And the picture that you get looking at the war through that lens is much different than the picture you get looking at arrows on a map. And that's one of the things that these leaked documents shed some light on. The Ukrainians appear to be running quite dangerously short of air defense missiles, for example. They can't match Russia's use of artillery. And their ability to continue getting those supplies from the West is very much in doubt. Not so much because the West is unwilling to provide them, but simply because our capacity to continue doing so for a long period of time is in doubt. Our stockpiles of this kind of ammunition are certainly dwindling over time. So that's an issue that very much has implications for how this war might end.
Well, officials have been left scrambling after many classified Pentagon documents containing information about the Ukraine war was leaked. On Monday, the Washington Post appeared to call on the Department of Justice to wage a full-scale investigation to root out the leaker. Journalist Glenn Greenwald blasted the Washington Post editorial board's piece, tweeting out, quote, "The Post urges the Biden DOJ to find and punish the leaker. It's always bizarre to watch journalistic outlets urge the state to imprison leakers, especially ones whose motto is democracy dies in darkness," all while admitting the docs reveal little. Well, first, is it true that the documents reveal very little? And doesn't it, isn't it the case that the American people deserve access to real information about the reality on the ground for Ukraine in their calculation about whether political figures should continue to give financial assistance, weapons assistance to Ukraine?
Well, I think the documents don't reveal anything new to the U.S. government. The U.S. government already knew all of this information prior to these leaks. But what they do is they reveal to the American public a gap between the narrative that has prevailed in the U.S. media, much of which has been advanced by the U.S. government, about what's really going on in this war, and what the facts on the ground really look like. So does the American public have a right to see U.S. intelligence information? No. There are good reasons for this information to be kept secret. Obviously, the exposure of this sort of capability to our adversaries compromises our ability to gather this information. But the American people do have a right for the U.S. government to level with them about what's really going on in the war and prospects for its resolution over time. And I think these leaks indicate that the reality on the ground and the narrative that the U.S. government has been advancing are very much out of step with one another.
I was listening to an interview with John Mearsheimer, political scientist, and he made the case that it will be difficult to frame the conclusion of this war as anything other than a Russian victory, insofar as that he does not believe that Russia is going to concede, all of the territory that it has claimed. And there might be some tweaks on the margins here or there, but they're going to end up with more than they had at the beginning of this war, which seems to be a position that many in the West, many in our government seem to find completely unpalatable. What does that mean for the end to this conflict if the lines that have been drawn are that Russia has achieved capture of some territory, that the United States will not concede that sort of a victory? Where does that leave us?
Well, if you're framing this war as about territorial acquisition, then I think that situation that you're describing is inaccurate. But the war is not just about territory, number one. The war is about achieving an acceptable security arrangement in Europe that Russia is a part of. So one of the things I think we need to bear in mind is that the Russians have already failed to a great degree in achieving the ambitions that they had at the beginning of the war. They tried to seize the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. That failed. They tried to grab vast portions of Ukrainian territory to turn Ukraine into essentially a subordinate rump state, subject to Russian domination. That has failed. What they may be able to do is to secure more of the Donbass, the eastern regions of Ukraine, and secure a land bridge that connects Russian territory proper with Crimea. But that's far short of what they were hoping to do at the beginning of this war. So in terms of whether this is a Russian victory or not, to a great degree, it has been a failure already. And I think our challenge right now is to define the outcome in this war in a way that facilitates a settlement. Unless we're able to come up with a settlement that both sides buy into, this war is going to continue for a long time to come, and Ukraine itself is likely to suffer enormous damage during that period of time. So in the interest of stability in Europe and in the world, and in the interest of the Ukrainian people, I think finding a settlement is very much in our interest.
Do we have any evidence, any reason to think that behind closed doors the Biden administration agrees with that and does want to bring about a resolution, something short of a total Ukrainian victory? Basically, do they have a position, do you think, that's different from their public position of unlimited support forever until Russia is totally and utterly defeated?
Well, I think there are certainly parts of the Biden administration that recognizes that there needs to be some sort of agreement ending this war. The challenge, of course, is if you signal to the Russians that our support for Ukraine is temporary, that it won't continue, you actually disincentivize Russia from coming to the negotiating table. They just wait it out. They wait until U.S. support runs dry, and then they don't have to compromise with Ukraine. So publicly, you want a posture that says we're going to be in this for as long as necessary. Our support will endure. But behind the scenes, we need to be looking for diplomatic ways out of this situation. We need to be engaging with the Russians in finding a diplomatic settlement. We can't just leave this up to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians aren't capable by themselves of negotiating an end to this war. They can negotiate on territory, yes, that's up to them. But the broader question of Europe's security architecture, Ukraine's place in that architecture and Russia's place in that architecture is something the United States itself has to be engaged in.
George Bebee, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
More Rising after this.